Here we go with the breakdown of episode 4 of the Tales of the Jedi. Let's get straight into it. We begin with Dooku deleting the Jedi records on Kamino, letting us know that by this point, Dooku is already in cahoots with Palpatine. It also adds a whole lot more detail to how Dooku used Sifo Dyas' identity to avoid attracting any attention. Sifo Dyas was a Jedi who was killed by the Pyke Syndicate, a hit that was paid for by Count Dooku in order to tie up any loose ends. The development of the clone army was commissioned by Sifo Dyas himself, but eventually secretly taken over by Count Dooku. So Dooku erasing the Jedi records on Kamino is another way of covering his tracks. This, however, would be picked up on by Obi Wan while trying to track down Jango Fett. Dooku talks to Jocasta Nu, the Jedi librarian, who informs him that Qui Gon has apparently claimed to encounter a Sith Lord, letting us know that this episode takes place during the events of the Phantom Menace. We then cut to Qui Gon and Yaddle. Yaddle was of course a long-standing member of the Jedi Council at this time, only later choosing to step down. A member of Yoda's species, Yaddle was first seen in the Phantom Menace. Dooku greets Qui Gon and the two of them have a brief chat about the events on Tatooine. Qui Gon tells Dooku that he doesn't need to worry about him as Obi Wan now watches his back. Dooku replies that he would like to meet Obi Wan someday, foreshadowing their encounter many years later on Geonosis.
Qui Gon always spoke very highly of you.
As Yaddle and Dooku part ways, you can see how Dooku walks towards the darkness while Yaddle walks towards the light, symbolizing the diverging paths of both characters. We then cut to Dooku standing before the Great Tree, a Force-sensitive tree at the heart of the Jedi Temple. We are then told that there has been quite a bit of a time skip since the last scene, and that Qui Gon is now dead. News of Qui Gon's death greatly saddens Dooku, who now holds the Jedi Council responsible for the death of his former apprentice. While Dooku doesn't explicitly say it out loud, Yaddle is still able to sense Dooku's true feelings behind the matter. What Qui Gon's death has effectively done is cement Dooku's commitment to Palpatine. With nothing left to hold him at the Jedi Order, Dooku willingly turns his back on it. As Dooku heads to visit Palpatine, Yaddle follows closely behind and the two head into the industrial sector of Coruscant, a place where Palpatine would frequently meet with Dooku to avoid the detection of the Jedi Council. Something which we briefly saw after the Battle of Geonosis. Dooku confronts Sidious about Qui Gon's death, and while Sidious feigns ignorance, he admits that he too has lost an apprentice. As Yaddle eavesdrops on the conversation, it becomes clear that while Dooku has decided to work for Palpatine, he is still somewhat guilt-ridden by his own actions. Yaddle decides to interrupt the conversation, telling Dooku to step away and to help bring Sidious to justice. And there is a very clever background setup behind both characters, with Yaddle standing behind the light and Dooku in darkness with Sidious on his shoulder acting like the devil. Sidious demands that Dooku kills Yaddle to prove his loyalty. The two duel in a fight somewhat reminiscent of Dooku's duel with Yoda, and the animation work here is simply fantastic. Yaddle admits that the Council's decision hasn't always been right, that Qui Gon did not need to die, telling us that she stepped down from her position as a Council member in response. But Dooku refuses to listen and the duel continues once again. The two clash over and over again, but a much older Yaddle quickly tires out and Dooku decides to slam the door down on her, plunging himself in the dark. Sidious proclaims Dooku as his apprentice, but in a last-ditch effort, Yaddle uses the Force to lift the door, bringing in the light once again. This shot of Yaddle lifting the door is purely symbolic of the perseverance of the light, that even in perpetual darkness, the light will return eventually. And if you slow down the footage, you can actually see that Sidious instinctively recoils from the light. As the embodiment of darkness, Sidious immediately tries to hide from it. And it's reflective of how Sidious is always hiding from something, whether it's his identity or the light. Dooku, on the other hand, seems somewhat terrified and in awe of what he sees. You get almost a sense of regret for what he has done, and you start to realize that Dooku is really just a man who lost his way. But all this effort is too much for Yaddle and she collapses onto the ground, the darkness returning once again. And even though Yaddle ultimately fails to stop Sidious or Dooku, it's still such a brief, powerful moment about the resilience of the light side and seriously explores the themes of good and evil in a way that has never been done before. The notion that good will always return to challenge evil is a perfect fit for Star Wars and foreshadows the light's eventual return in the Return of the Jedi. Dooku then raises his lightsaber and ends Yaddle's life, cementing his new role as a Sith Lord. It should be noted that from here on out, Dooku doesn't immediately leave the Jedi Order. Instead, Dooku would only leave the council shortly after under the pretext that he wanted to reclaim his family title as Count, after killing his brother and following an Abyssinian invasion of his home world of Sereno. So that was the breakdown for episode 4 of the Tales of the Jedi. And this was by far my favorite episode. Everything from the dialogue, the animation, the music, the cinematography, everything just hit the right spot. And it really is just illustrative of how far Dave Filoni has come since the early days of the Clone Wars. And you can really see the quality of the writing has definitely come through. Anyways, that's all for this video. I will see you in episode 5. I am the Lost Acolyte.
And I have spoken.